Good morning, and we are pleased to be here. So let's just get started. We have some key points we want you to walk away with, but the number one thing we want you to remember is you're part of a bigger system. And if you don't know that and you don't know how to work in that, then you can't create any change. Because change begins with you, but it has to expand out. And you live in a system, and we are a part of systems. So we're going to take you through a little journey today. We're going to show you our legacy, how we got to here as people who manage business systems, okay? And we want to show you some things we've lost along the way. And as we lose things, we should be replacing them with better things, but we haven't done that. We're going to show you why. If you don't know the why of something, you're going to take an action that doesn't get the right root cause. So if you can't explain why something is wrong or broken, you have a very little opportunity of convincing other people to help you fix it. So we're going to be talking about standing on the shoulders of giants, because there isn't anybody who hasn't stood on someone's shoulder to create a change. Every single person in this room can stand on the shoulders of everybody, and you get to lift the whole world up. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why change and what to change. If you don't think there's a problem, then you aren't going to spend any effort to change. If you don't know what to change, then you're going to change the wrong thing. We are going to talk about new rules and tools, and our philosophy is before you spend any time on software tools, you better know the right rules. And today I'm going to tell you, and I think Carol's going to agree, we've been bouncing around back and forth with each other 30 years, well, maybe over 30 years, and finally quit bouncing back off each other with ideas and started working together probably about 5 years ago, solidly. And we will tell you that the rules are broken. And that means that the tools that built with those rules are broken. So if you don't know the right rules, you have no business building tools. So you got to learn those first before you start with the tools. And those are all based on the changes in something we're going to talk about called complexity science. And one of the things that is frustrating is that business leaders and business managers don't have any idea complex adaptive systems exist, what their rules are and how they behave, and yet they're attempting to manage them, okay? So we're going to learn some new rules today, because if you don't get the rules right, you can't play right, and you don't win. And you can't get smart metrics or improve without that. I'm supposed to point that way. This is our journey. Carol and I put our books up here together. I started this in 1986 when I was in the EMBA program at the University of Washington. I got the book called The Goal by Dr. Ellie Goldratt. If you haven't read it, you should. It changed my life because I got so fascinated with it and I couldn't get anybody interested in it. So I actually quit working and went to teaching. I went to teaching because I knew Dr. Goldratt gave grants to professors. Not grants like the IMA, but he would let you come and listen to him for 2 weeks for free. So that was... Most people had to pay. Yep. Out of that came that book, Theory of Constraints and Its Implications for Management Accounting, which is such a catchy title that it's on everybody's coffee table. And, but Ellie so liked that book that he bought the rights to it and he published it. And so that sort of began what I'm going to say is a consulting career of, I just basically went in and said, I don't know how to fix this, but I'll look at it and see what it could do. Out of that came Ditch Witch, 1998. Now what I want you to see, if I can do the laser correctly, and I'm going to use this side, is look at these results, okay? That's pretty powerful. That's in a year, less than a year. Next journey was 1997. I wrote a book called Measurement Nightmare. And in that book, there is one page. I refused to ever open that book after it was done. When you've written a book and it's either you love the child or you hate the child, you just don't want to even see it or talk about it. But there's a page that was pointed out to me in the end that literally I laid out a map of what I believed quote to cash would be for an entire system, and where the decoupling points and where the control points would be. I called them a different name. And it was a theory because it hadn't been done before. And I said, I think this is the solution to the problem. Since that time in 1998, we started working in vertical integrated companies, and what we learned in that Roseburg is the largest privately held forest company in North America. And they grow their own trees, they make every single wood product you can imagine. And what we learned is the power of vertical integration. Look at those results. I worked with them for 2 years. Okay. Change the rules. In 2005, started working with a company called Romac. Look at those results. During that time, between 2005 and 2006, we realized that Carol had written a book called Necessary But Not Sufficient.
Yeah, built on the fact in '97 I wrote my first book on MRP called MRP and Beyond. And I wrote it because of a financial person that I worked with. I was at aerospace at the time. We were building all the overhead bins for all the Boeing 737s and 757s. And we were implementing MRP, but we were doing some really crazy stuff where we were scheduling to a drum and we were doing pull-on materials and all the things that they told us we couldn't do. So I did my first case study, my very first presentation ever with the Apex International Group called Yes, You Can, because I listened to 4 years of, you can't do that. So we wrote a little paper called Yes, You Can, built on that, and wrote my first book, MRP and Beyond. Got very involved with the Apex organization, and in 1998, was invited by Apex to write the very first book in the world on ERP. Because MRP2 had switched to ERP, no books, so they said, would you write the book? So I struggled with the fact that during those times, remember when we couldn't say TOC and ERP or MRP in the same word, because there was this holy war going on. And I was at the Apex conference going the big ta-da on the ERP book up there, since it was one of only 2 books on ERP, the first 2 books that year. And Ellie walked in the back of the room. And he comes up to me afterwards and he said, would you have time for a cup of coffee? What are you going to say to Goldrat? No. Of course I have time for a cup of coffee. So that's when he invited me to collaborate with him and Ellie Schregenheim, and together we wrote Necessary But Not Sufficient. Now understand, by this time in my career, I'm working at IBM. Well, the book is about technology. How do you apply technology to a business? And here's this person from IBM collaborating with these 2 giants of TOC, and out came Necessary But Not Sufficient. So then after that, I went back and rewrote the ERP book and got all those pages that I look at before and go, I knew that wasn't right. But then we went back and I rewrote it and put out the second edition of the book.
And I'm going to say that in 1998, when we did Ditch Witch, because they're totally vertically integrated also, the only thing they don't build is their engines, we realized we couldn't do it without technology, okay? And from 98 to 2001 and 2003, we actually had to work inside the client's technology and build outside, okay? Build outside, work inside, build outside, and every single one was unique and different. By 2005, it was clear to me, by 2003, that you had to have software that could do what you need to do with the new rules. So in 2005 and 2006, these people were the people who bravely took on our ideas about technology. So let's go forward to 2004 and 2009. And what we learned in 2004 and 2009 was how to analyze a deep layered bill. These guys build jack-up oil rigs, drilling platforms, largest earth-moving and equipment in the world. You can put my F-250 in the bucket. These things have very long lives, 20 to 30 years. They get refurbished. They are giant projects, and they're projects to maintain. And I want you to see those results. But mostly I want you to look at this one. This says they had 6x revenue growth in those 5 years, 6 years, with a 0.8 increase in inventory. Now do you understand why their ROI went through the roof? Okay. We were able to take drilling rigs, first-in-class drilling rigs. When Katrina came through, it killed 7 rigs in the Gulf. Rowan was their parent. They got $1 million a week for renting those drilling rigs. They were rented out at 98% a year. You lose 7 of them, think about that. It takes 27 months to build a first-in-class drilling rig, and we got it down to 12 months. And then we learned to stagger them so we could start one every 3 months. So you can imagine the cash flow that went to the parent that isn't even in that. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. By looking at analyzing deep and broad product and project structures, we found some more ideas about how to decouple so that we can stop variation, because variation is the enemy of everything, whether you're in projects or you're in products. In 2010, Carol and I were part of a joint project to write that TOC handbook. So some other people in this room wrote chapters, but that was the first time that actively synchronized replenishment, which became demand-driven MRP, actually got brought to light by you and Chad.
Absolutely. And one of the editors of that book, John Schleier, who was the operating vice president for IBM in Rochester, Minnesota, he called me up and he says, Carol, do you guys realize what you've done? And I said, I don't know, John, what do you think we've done? And he said, that's the first innovation in formal material planning since MRP was invented in 1950. And so he went back to McGraw-Hill and said, you've got to publish a book on this. So McGraw-Hill called me, I'll never forget this, May of 2009, and they said, would you consider updating an MRP book that had not been updated? And, and I thought, ooh, they found my first book from 97, yay. And they said it was a bestseller. I thought, no, it wasn't my book. And I said, which
Those aren't any of my books either, Carol.
I said, I really wish Elliot asked me to write the goal with him, but then I wouldn't still need to be working, right? So, no, necessary but not sufficient. All right, let's test this theory. How many of you have read the goal? Nice. How many of you have read necessary but not sufficient? See why I'm still working?
I'm not even going to ask.
So what happened is then McGraw-Hill calls me, and I said, well, what book are we talking about? And they said, it's Orlicky's MRP. Now, after IBM, I went to PeopleSoft. I was vice president in charge of all the manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, retail, and all that stuff for strategy for PeopleSoft. And I knew that every ERP company around the world had coded to Orlicky's original book. That was truly the Bible of all the formal planning systems that were in the world, and still are today. Still hasn't changed. So I knew what they had just asked us to do when I called Chad, and I said, Chad, we've just been invited by McGraw-Hill to write the 3rd edition, the 4th and 5th edition of Orlicky's MRP. And there was dead silence on the other end of the phone. And I said, are you there? He says, yeah. He said, but that's the Bible of manufacturing. I said, yes, and we've just been asked to write the New Testament. So that's when Orlicky's MRP came out in 2011. Really challenging the rules built on what Deb and her team had developed by working with all these companies around the world. Now, why are we going through all this? Not to say, oh, look at all the experiences Deb and Carol have had together and how many times our
we're standing on the shoulders of giants,
but
very
it's
big
how
giants.
we stand on the shoulders of giants and move forward.
Yeah, but it's practical application. I mean, you learn by doing, okay? And we were lucky enough to have access to people, great leaders like Dan Eckerman, who was the president and CEO of Laterno, who basically hired me in a week because I got taken home by his vice president of improvements because he came to one of our conferences. And he just looked me in the eye as a Texan. And after we'd done our week of work and looking at what to do, he just looked me in the eye and he said, just tell me one thing. Is this the right thing to do? And I said, it's the right thing to do, and it's probably the only thing to get you out of 3% return on investment. And he looked at Rudy, and he said, Rudy? And he said, yeah. And he said, okay, well, then let's do it. He said, I'm going to retire in the next 6 years. He said, I can either keep this thing alive, and I'll retire fine, or we can grow this puppy and see where it goes. That is an amazing person, okay? So you can't do it without those people. None of this would exist without my clients. None of this would exist. And what was really funny is when we did Laterno, we really learned about DDMRP. It became, and Chad kept saying to us, do you know what you guys do? Do you know what we've done? And we said, yeah, we fixed this thing that's broken. It's always broken. I don't care about MRP. And what he said is, no, we've got something much bigger here. And I said, I don't care. I've been trying to change people's view of accounting. You think I'm going to go out and now try and change people's view of MRP? And I haven't really succeeded because you all still are doing the same dumb things with measures, right? So I've been doing this for 30 years, so obviously some new voice ought to go out there. So I said, here's the person who knows the most about MRP. Have at it, Take it out there, make it public knowledge. If you have something good, do not be afraid that other people will copy it. Hope they do, because they create a market for you. Okay? That's what you really want, is you want to drive things forward. So I want to talk about 2011. After Orlicky's came out, we started working with a small company called Unilever in 2011, and they're bigger than most third world countries. They are like taking the Titanic and turning it. I want you to see those results. They are a fast-moving consumer goods. That's the first time I'd ever been in fast-moving consumer goods. I've always been deep and dirty in projects and products, okay? What we learned there is something called prioritized share. Most companies distribute from a hub and send it out to where SAP or any of the other ERP tells them to send the least cost transportation, get it on the truck, or the least cost warehouse for distribution. Has nothing to do with who needs it with shelf space. Does that make sense to you? Okay? So what we do instead is we have actively replenished systems. It says this is the most important. These are the priorities. There's 5 zones in these buffers, and it says, I only have this much. I'm going to make sure that we have an equal distribution of at least to some portion of the zone in every single shelf. Does that make sense to you what I just said? So it is a prioritized share. We've just recently developed that with prioritized share for capacity in DBR, and that is a scheduling system. So now these two things are actually taking any scarce resource, whether it's shelf space or it's the commodity or it is the scarce capacity, and prioritizing the share in an entire network because it's all visible, visual, and real time. And I just, that's sort of our journey right now. That's what we're working on, along with taking what we call now demand-driven adaptive systems. And Carol and Chad have written a new book, and I'm going to let you talk about that, taking out what we've done with smart metrics and S&OP.
Yeah, thanks. The new book will be out. You're seeing the cover for the first time. This is the first audience ever to see that cover. It'll be out in July. And as Deb said, a lot of large companies have come forward. Matter of fact, next week I'll be down in South Carolina with Michelin. Michelin has got 3 pilots running across Europe. And it's because of metrics. It's because of understanding how metrics affect what we do every day and how we view things, how it affects the networks that we're part of, the system. All right, and when I say system, I don't mean computer system. Okay, what we're talking about when we mean system, we mean
the us.
System, the us.
You.
The us as people are a system, the us as a company are a system, the us as a company as part of our clients is a system. And so that's really what the work has been with the demand-driven adaptive system and looking at that schema. And how do we apply that to companies that go from fast-moving consumer goods to oil drilling platforms? So that's what we're here today to discuss, is what is the thought process, what are the giants underneath that we've stood on together. And this is a thrill for me. We've been working together off and on and bouncing each other for a while. And we said to April, thank you very much, April, I said, let's just do it together on stage. They originally had us scheduled one and then the other. It was like, nah.
It doesn't make any sense.
We've been wanting to do this together for a long time. So thank you, April.
So we want to know, who are we talking to? So we're going to start by saying, how many people here have only had one type of job? How many people here manage projects? Stand up. Stand up. I want to see the standing up. Okay. All right. How many people here manage production or products?
Some of you project people could stay standing as well.
Okay. Well, you depend. No, this is fine. Okay. How many people here work on the finance end of things?
Now watch all those folks sit down. There you go.
Oh, jeez. You're alone. All right. Do finance people kind of, oh, no, you're not alone. I got fixated in looking into the light.
Right. No, don't look into the light.
Now, how many people have had more than one type of experience? More than one project, more than one products, more than, so I can talk to you about a supply chain, because for me a supply chain is from the minute I get a signal from the market to make them something till I actually get paid for it. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So now that we know who we're speaking to, I'm supposed to be pointing it that way, we want you to know you are much bigger as a system than you are what you just stood up. And you get frustrated with each other because you give handoffs that aren't very good. Okay. So I love this. In fact, when I saw this, I decided that I might even return to TOC. I kind of blew off TOC in 2007, and that's not the right word, because I really believe that the foundation and thinking processes is what we're built on, and the recognition of constraints. But constraints aren't what really block us. Okay. So we're going to talk about that. But Ellie, the year before he died, came out with one more pillar in what he was looking at is the basics of what he called theory of constraints. And that was never say, I know. Now, that's been my motto solidly, because when I walk into a client, I don't tell them I know the answer. I just tell them I know we can find the answer, because we know the rules. Now, every design is different because it has to fit the uniqueness of what it is you're doing. That design belongs to that company, but the rules always are the same. And when he said this, I want you to see this is what I want you to think about doing, because when I looked at what Carol and I have done, this is exactly what we've always done. I identify a giant, something I'm really interested in because I want to know more about it. Then the next thing comes up is I find the area addressed by the giant where it still doesn't make sense to me. Why is this thing still broken? I mean, if this is supposed to be how it works, how come I still don't get good results? Okay? And reality gives you the signal that there's more to find. Reality, the signal you're going to get in reality is when you see a conflict. conflicts don't exist, I'm going to say, in the universe. There's no conflict in the jungle. Things eat things. You either adapt, you die, stars get born, planets die. Do you see what I'm saying? There's not a conflict. It just goes this way, right? Now, you don't have to like it, and that sort of starts to present your conflict, true? The conflict happens when you expect something to happen and it didn't. Does that make sense? So you get a signal from reality that I pushed here and it was supposed to do that and it didn't do that. Then that means that there's more that can be done and more that you should be able to identify. So when you get on the shoulders of those giants and you look at the historical perspective and understand the solution from what perspective they took it, you get a whole new view, because what we find out is we've gotten the watered down version. We got the watered down version of lean. The watered down version of TOC is out there, which is why I don't want to hear, Dr. Goldratt never ever said, oh, just do what I said. He'd always say, think of something new, do something new, think for yourself. So you don't get there by rote rules. Do you understand what I'm saying? So one of the things when I wrote Demand Driven is I went back and I looked at who I thought the giants were and what did they really understand and what did they really do. You identify the difference between what reality the giant did and what was left untouched, or what has changed in the reality since they existed. Okay, things have changed. Then you identify the wrong assumption. So one of the things I want you to look at today is we're going to show you some work about how to put thoughtware into an organization, and it always begins with identifying the wrong assumption. Because my assumptions are the glue that hold my logic together. Does that make sense? And if they're wrong, how good is your logic? Right. So that's basically what we have been doing. And when I looked at that, I thought, well, that's really what we've been doing, and I can explain things pretty well that way. So what we want to do is we want to show you the core problem. And I have from day one, I have approached everything from a little different perspective because I've always been fascinated with what drives people's behavior. And there's two types of accounting. There's financial accounting and there's management accounting. And management accounting is always about behavior. It's about how do I make a good decision with relevant information to get people to take the right action so that I get the result that goes to return on investment. That's management accounting. Has nothing to do with financial accounting. It's practical application of basic economics and some human behavior, okay? So we're going to take you through doing that, and I'm going to start with the history of flow. This guy is the biggest giant I think that probably ever lived. He invented calculus. In fact, it was even said after Newton that there's no, we've discovered everything there is in the universe. There's no more science to discover. Well, that was wrong, but that's not Newton's fault. He is responsible for something called the Industrial Revolution, and it is the first time in the history of humankind that we had change on a scale never seen before. We are living in that kind of change today on steroids. Would you agree? But this is talking about a guy who we used to go in, and 6 months later, 10, 20 little craftsmen would pull a car out, to Ford, who could put a car out in 2.5 hours. Now, that is change, right? Okay. And one of these guys named Frederick Taylor, who is a giant, he invented basically the father of operations management. If you don't know anything about him, that's a shame. But here is his primary objectives. Does that primary objective look familiar to you? It better, okay? It is the basis for everything that goes on in process improvement, yes? He invented standard routings, standard times, but not standard costing. So we can't blame him. Henry Ford, we all know about him, but one of the things that's really fascinating about him is he knew about the slowest task governs flow. There was his primary objective, velocity to scale. But my absolute favorite is a guy named F. Donaldson Brown, and who probably nobody knows, but he's the father of management accounting, and he was an engineer. In fact, engineers and accountants always seem to be hooked to the hip. He invented the ROI equation, cost volume profit analysis, flexible budgeting, and he, together with Sloan, were put in charge of a little company called GM, and that was because the DuPont brothers bought the failing company, put together a consortium. He invented all those things working for the DuPont brothers. First time there was ever hybrids. If you have a conglomerate, how do you know where to put your money? There was no balance sheets before that. Nobody had ever put any balance sheets together. He and Sloan, in 18 months, drove Ford out of business. Ford had to close his factories, and up until that time, 95% of all the cars in the world were Fords. So he did it with exactly having right information, relevant information, and spotting a change. One was financing, and the second was you could have a car in a color you liked. How about that? Okay.
Thanks. And that's an interesting comparison in strategies, too, because what was Ford's strategy? His whole strategy was trying to focus on getting a car down so that it was so low in cost that every American could buy one. And what did Brown with Sloan figure out? Financing. And actually, Ford thought that that was just the worst thing he'd ever heard, and as Deb said, almost put Ford out of business with an 85% market share. So let's see where that comes forward into the future time. So now let's look at flow. Let's stand on those shoulders of giants, and let's come to our more current time. Where do we understand our idea of process improvement? Well, our first guy is who? Who is this? Here's your test. That's Deming, isn't it? W. Edwards Deming, an American. I always like to talk about him. I always take him as my token American as I travel around the world. Not that we listen to him, though, right? Where did he go? Japan, right? But what did Deming understand? He understood about flow because he understood about variability, and he understood that as you improve variability, you improve the sigma of the process, it improves flow, right? How many black belts do I have in here besides myself? Okay, a few. How about green belts? Awesome. Very good. So that's our whole thing in Six Sigma, isn't it? How do I improve flow by reducing a variability? Then, how about this guy? Taiichi Ohno, right? Toyota Production System. And what, okay, where's my lean guys? Any lean guys in here? All right, what's the goal of lean? Reduce waste. No, it's not. We have bastardized it in the Western world. If you really look at what Ohno wrote, what he wrote about was what he called his river production system. What did we do? As Deb said, we put on our assumptions that underlie our logic, and we still have that old Ford hat on that says, well, I must reduce cost, so therefore I must reduce waste. Why? Because I know that what's my goal? Where'd it come from? This guy, right? What's the goal? All those hands that went up, right? What's the goal? They're all afraid to answer, right? I heard it in the back. Make money now and into the future. All right, now being the logical beings that we are, how do we make money? We know the formula, don't we? Revenue minus cost equals profit. Our job is to be profitable now and into the future. So now, doing what we do for a living, which one of those two can we affect? Revenue or cost? Cost, right? So what have we all driven on? Oh, therefore our objective must be to reduce cost. How well did that work for Ford? And so what have we done? That's our assumption that we've built underneath all of our metrics, all of our processes, all of our procedures, everything that we do is to try to drive down cost. Ohno never said reduce waste. He said improve flow. He talked about his river production system. When Ellie spoke, it was all about increasing throughput. So that's our flow is tying together our improvement. So now, this is common sense, right? So common sense clearly leads to a common strategy. So then why is it that companies are struggling, not just here in the United States, but around the world with getting sustainable results? You know, because Ellie never said just make money. It was make money now and into the future. Doesn't help if I just do it this quarter, and the next quarter I'm not. All right? This is not about riding this curve where I hire and fire and hire and fire and hire and fire. Why do we have these issues? Why is common sense not common practice? So let's look at system flow. All right? System flow. System flow is a strategy, is the foundational strategy. Okay, how do we do that? Well, let's go back to another giant. This giant might surprise you. George Plossl is one of the fathers of MRP. All right, it was Plossl, Orlicky, White, and Dick Ling. Of those four, Dick Ling is still alive. You want to talk about, as Deb said, you go back to what they really tell you, and I'm very fortunate, I've known Dick for about 40 years. I spend hours with him on the phone, and he tells me why they did certain things that they did as they created formal planning systems. Not the least of which, and you guys will appreciate this, being Intel, the first MRP system ran a company's full material planning explosion, was written in 8K of memory. Not 8 megs, not 8 gigs, 8K. Now, do you think there were some simplifying assumptions they had to do to make that happen? Of course. But Plossel I knew as well. He was also a very good friend. And he would go out, and everything that he talked about is he would say, all benefits are directly related to the speed of flow of materials and information. This is Plossel. This is one of the MRP guys. Got to go back and listen to the giants. So as we look at a business, what are the flows that we're concerned about? Well, we look at what? We look at the flow of information, comes back through our organizations, right? And what comes forward? Information and materials. And what comes backwards? Hopefully, cash. Okay? So there's a caveat that we added, the demand-driven team added, Deb and Chad and myself and the CMG team, that we said, you know what? Materials and information is important. And what's going on today, we're getting all caught up in this thing of big data. The more data I have and the more analysis I do, therefore I must be able to make better and faster decisions. Somebody run me through that logic. More is not better. Relevant is better. So the materials and the information must be relevant. Now, what's relevant? Well, and Deb's going to get more into this, but basically when I'm making a decision, only those things that vary between those two that decision are relevant. Including irrelevant data helps us make a bad decision and take longer at it. He said, point it this way. Okay.
This way.
That way. So what are some of the benefits that we're looking for? Yes, I can be taught. So what are some of the benefits that we are looking for?
You could be Vanna White, Carol.
What's that?
You could be Vanna White.
So what are some of the benefits that we're looking for? Service. Service is consistent and reliable when our system flows well. Agree? Right. What else? When we have good service, then what's protected and maximized? Revenue. What do we know about inventory? It goes down. All right, now here's for my lean guys. Where did lean start? What country? Japan. US. Wrong. You guys are on the wrong continent. Italy. Italy. It's Italian. You didn't know. It's Italian. It's Italian. Actually started in ancient Venice with the Venetian trading vessels having to be retrofit to warships. That's why so much of our lean stuff goes to water. So it had everything to do with ships. So when we look at things flow well, what happens? Expenses are minimized. All right? Cash flow is better. And that's goodness. Because what's better, profit or cash flow? I had an interesting conversation between a PhD in finance in France from one of the very best business schools and the owner of a company. Those two toured each other for about 45 minutes. I sat down. All right? The owner was like, yeah, profit's important. What's more important is cash flow and ROI. And the finance, oh no, it's all about the P&L. So here's our formula that connects flow to return on investment. Because our objective is ROI. So let's look at Plossel's first law. If I improve flow, I improve cash velocity. Yes? Yes, in every kind of industry. If I improve cash velocity, then what have I improved? I've improved net profit divided by investment. That has been since F. Donaldson Brown, and still is, the formula for ROI. So what are we missing? Right? What are we missing? Well, what we're missing is, well, first let's define what is flow. It's always interesting to get the definitions down. Flow is the rate at which a system converts, all right, materials, inputs, capacities to product required by whom? Customer. I don't care how much of a good developer you are, if somebody doesn't buy it, you're not making any money at it. Cash velocity. What is that? That's the rate of net cash generation. Sales dollars minus truly variable cost, relevant costs. All right, this is known in the TOC world as throughput dollars. In the accounting world, known as contribution margin, minus any period operating expense. And what's our last one? Our net profit divided by investment is, and has been for a while, the equation for ROI. So flow enables our key KPIs, right? KPIs, key performance indicators. Now, if you really want to get Deb and I going, start talking about balanced scorecards. By definition, you're what? Balance? You're putting people in conflict with each other. That is the worst thing you can ever do to your people, is to put somebody in the position of either doing what's good for their performance or doing what's good for the company, or putting departments in conflict with each other. And how many times have we seen these departments in conflict with each other? How about marketing? What do they like to do? Drive manufacturing nuts, right? Quality? Right? The guys in finance go, no, those guys never want to ship anything. Operations, just please leave me alone. Let me do what I've always done, and I will be happy. But when I focus on flow, all those areas, key performance indicators, if they're smart, get improved. But do our actions in each of these departments drive flow? And the answer is no. Matter of fact, they tend to block flow, right, because they're focused on cost. Right? They block it, they block return on investment, and they're doing it not with malice of forethought. It's, as Deb said, this assumption underneath that my goal is I must reduce costs. That's the only way I'm going to improve ROI. When in fact, the more I focus on cost, the more I destroy my company. All right? So planning, when I look at these KPIs, they're not driving to flow. They're driving us away from flow. So why change? Why change? You know, we've got 5 decades. Let's take a look. This is a slide that I am absolutely embarrassed to take globally. I spend very little of my time in the United States. My last passport I filled up 3 years ahead of its renewal time. They finally gave me one of those big ones. You know those big ones, the 54 pagers? Okay? I'm a third of the way through that sucker already. All right? I spend very little time in the US, but I hate to show this, but it's true. This is the return on investment for asset businesses that are American-owned. They may have global operations, but they're American-owned between 1965 and 2012.
Europe hasn't done any better, honey.
Sorry?
Nobody else has done any better. They've all done the same.
Yeah, I know it.
It's okay.
But I'm an American, you know, and I'm very much the non-stereotypical American. So, you know, I don't run around going, yeah, U.S. has got it right. U.S. didn't have it right. Look at this decline. From 4.1% down to 0.9%. Now you might say, oh, it's a labor thing, right? Wait, that's coming. This is horrible. Okay? Because what have we been doing? We've been trying to outsource for cheap labor, right? So that we get better return on our assets. Now let's take a look at a comparison of the top quartile and the bottom quartile. You say, oh, it's those, you know, it's those scumbags down at the bottom that are just having a hard time, right? Really? Let's take a look at the top one. Look at the top one. This is the top quartile, and there's a continued gap. It's significant. This is significant. This is a dramatic reduction. Look at the bottom quartile. It declined even more. The top are bad and the worst are worst. Sort of an interesting comparison, isn't there? All right, this is awful. Now, let's look at the topple rate. How fast, okay, remember, this is the top, this is the bottom. How fast do I go from the top to the bottom? Okay, the topple rate, I move from there. Look at what happened to the topple rate. Just because you're on top of the world doesn't mean you're going to stay there. All right? It does not mean you're going to stay there. It doesn't mean that just because you've done what you've always done, or you're going to continue to get what you've always got. I always love that when people say, oh, if we continue to do what we've always done, we're going to continue to get what we always got. And you know the definition of insanity? It's expecting something different. But the reality is where we are today, if I continue to do what I've always done, I am not going to get what I always got. The reason is somebody changed the rules. So I'm going to turn it over to Deb.
Thanks. What's pretty even more fascinating is labor productivity more than doubled. So who have we always blamed? Okay, who do we take it out on? Who can we find? So it isn't labor. In fact, what this tells you, if labor productivity hadn't doubled, where would we be? And this doesn't even include indirect labor, because indirect labor has taken a bigger hit than direct labor has in terms of decline and increase in productivity. Decline by how many people have to do the same work, because people say, well, we have technology. So the productivity of indirect labor is even higher than this. So what's the only thing that we can conclude? Well, these are my conclusions. And I know this is true because we don't see prices changing for a very long time, correct? Okay. I'm learning too. The practical life of assets and infrastructures, well, that's getting shorter. So we have a faster turn we have to get on that ROI. Look at all the massive efforts we put into forecast improvement, and it's never going to get any better. Working with Unilever, in fact, it's getting worse because the more we expand our supply chain, the bigger gap we put in time. The bigger gap we put in time, the more variation occurs between an event and a cause. So the demand signal is even more distorted, and the supply signal is even more distorted, and it has a name now called the bullwhip effect, and it's growing. And in working with Unilever, we watched them spend billions of dollars on a better forecasting. Well, they got maybe 55, 60%. That's not good. I mean, those are, I could go to Vegas, okay? The effect of offshoring, it hasn't done us any good at all. This was supposed to lower our costs and drive our return on investment through the roof, and instead, service levels declined, expedite costs increased. Why? Because we're still working with those forecasts, and we're attempting to, excuse me, we're attempting to deal with all the variation that gets put in with these really long lead times. And we have been spending tons and tons of money on ERP, and you know what we're doing? We're doing the wrong thing faster.
And now we can optimize it with APO.
And now we're
Yes.
spending more money to do it. So it's good. It's very good. There have been billions spent on lean and agile initiatives. And this is not a slap at lean. This is a slap at how we've done it. But where is the results? We are not getting the results. And I have to tell you, other than my clients, I have not seen sustainable theory of constraints results. I have clients who have been doing something for 15 years and get better and better. Why? Because we changed the rules and all the metrics. Theory of constraints got very stovepiped. It was do a DBR, do a project management. You can't do that. That's a system. We're ignoring, Ellie talked about systems. We've ignored the fact that we have to deal with the whole system. So when we look at this whole thing, the only conclusion that I've been able to come to is that we have people who are attempting to run companies that have absolutely no idea or understand what enables flow and how it connects to ROI. People do not understand in companies the connection between flow and ROI. Would you agree? Yes. Okay. So let's talk about what we can do about that. I love this quote. So let's talk about what to change. And I think this is what needs to change. This is the assumption that we have to change. There is a belief, and we teach it I even taught in master's programs, and I'm a product of some, that we know what we're doing and we know how to manage, and we don't. We don't even know what our systems, how they behave. Okay? So there is a deep truth, and I love this quote, and that's really what became the theme when I started writing the book, Demand Driven. I thought it was going to be about maybe an 8-month project. Turned out being 2.5 years because I totally trashed the book I was supposed to write and wrote the book that came out when I started looking at what was the problem. And there was a conversation between Niels Bohr and Einstein, and they were both very upset, or they were kind of consoling each other that they were outcasts of science because nobody believed anything that wasn't Newton. And these guys were talking about particle science and all kinds of things that didn't fit very well in the rest of the science community. They kind of shook it up. And what Bohr said to Einstein is the only thing that can replace a deep truth is an even deeper truth. Well, today, and I have been fighting this truth for 30 years, and we are stuck in today's deep truth that is this. Yes? Okay. Now, if one of you says to me before I leave here, but if we don't take our eyes off cost and don't keep focused on it, we'll lose money, I will slap you. So don't tempt me. I have lost patience at my old age. All right? So
We're still old enough to know better and still too young to care.
yeah, now I don't care. So today's deep truth is totally, completely, and unequivocally false, and I am not writing any more books about it, but why? But here's the thing. If you know it, and you can't explain it, let me just go back here, then you can't possibly bring anybody through it. So I have tried many different ways to explain it. I wrote a great book called Measurement Nightmare, 5-star book. You probably have never read it. It is true today as it was when I wrote it in 1997, and I refuse to revise it because why? So I wrote another book that I think says, this is what we thought the answer was. I can prove to you today what the answer is because case after case after case of it. So that's what we're going to do and show you. So how did we get here? Because the giants knew this. They didn't do this. They understood flow. So pre-1934, there weren't any investor groups. Okay, well, actually pre-1920s, there weren't any investor groups. There were pools and piles of people with money. But it was when we started putting stocks together that we actually had to explain to people how balance sheets worked. You know, did you make any money last year? How much are those assets worth? And a funny thing happened in 1929. It crashed. So we have the same infinite wisdom in our Congress today, who have given us some other interesting...
Yeah.
Yes. So, and I'm talking about things they've done with
you're
the
not
business.
talking about Obamacare.
No, Carol, you and I don't agree about things like that, but we still love each other. So, pre-1934, there was no accounting, there was no SEC, there was no balance sheets, right? So there was no connection to the idea of unit cost. Every connection was to flow. People understood that. F. Donaldson Brown never bought the idea. So they legislated generally accepted accounting principles, which was really financial accounting rules are arbitrated and mediated and, I'm going to say, lobbied for by Wall Street, the large CPA firms who represent their clients, and different industries, okay? Now, if you don't think that that can make a mess, it's a committee deciding rules. It is always looking in the past. It is a snapshot in time. What did you do last week? And this is how it looks, okay? Or this is a snapshot in time of what your assets are right at this moment. It's intended so that everybody has a level playing field, that your assets are comparable to my assets because we reported them the same. That is what is intended. Never was it to be used for forward-looking thinking. Okay? In 1965, as Carol talked about, they had this MRP revolution, and it was big, and it was about time and materials. It was, nothing to do with costing. It was how to plan and how to manage. Then closed-loop MRP came in, and I know because I came around about this time, and we started making schedules. So we were matching materials, now we're making schedules, and we're actually using computers to do it. In 1980s is when I was hit the financial world, and I put in MRP2 systems, and this is a fascinating thing. What we did is we convinced, MRP2 was sold to all of companies by, you can get rid of a lot of cost accountants, because it used to take them 3 weeks to close. You can close in 2 days, and all those pesky people that were doing the pencil pushing can go away. Huge indirect labor savings, and what happened is GAAP took over MRP as a costing system rather than a time and material system, and it became embedded in it. And so people lost even the ability to manage and use them. They're not even set up correctly in most cases when we walk in today. In fact, we have to totally change them, undo them, and redo them. So what you have right here is a very interesting thing. Now, we got really good at computers, and so by 1990, we had changed everything into ERP. And ERP is very fast and powerful, and embedded in the heart of it, in every single company, are all these bad cost rules that got put into MRP2. So you live with them, and you can't get them out. And today, we have managers, executives, and even accountants, and I'm going to prove to you that is true, who don't even understand that there is an entire side of accounting called management accounting. You can't even get the information out in a management accounting format. So you are stuck with GAAP as relevant information. Now, if somebody gives you a computer printout, it came out of the computer, and it says this is what it costs, and this is all I have to make decisions, I will make decisions from it. Even people who know better can't do anything about it because they can't get the right information out. So we're going to have to talk about the right information. I've always had a pretty good relationship with the Institute of Management Accountants. They are the management accounting body, one of the premier ones in the world. There's chartered accountants and CPAs, and then there are management accountants. I did a webinar when they they liked our book. They asked us to do an international webinar. And so what I want you to see is right here, there were 1,028 attendees on this webinar we did from 41 countries representing 850 different companies. So very good, broad sweep. What we asked was this question, and you had to answer the questions to get your CPE credits. So what we said is, what do you think the biggest factor in ROI is? Now, this is cool, because if I'd asked CPAs, I would have gotten 0, okay? But I got 35 saying flow. But I only got 35 in the people who should know. Does that feel kind of scary to you? Yeah, it should. Okay. Now, next thing I want you to take a look at what we have is we have 2 competing first strategies. We have 2 competing first laws. You cannot have 2 competing first laws that are diametrically opposed in driving tactical actions for your strategy. Let me say that again. I cannot have 2 diametrically opposed first strategies that will result in absolutely opposite tactical actions and have a coherent company. Does that make sense to you? Okay. So we got a problem, and let's explore this problem. And I want to show you how different this is. So at a tactical level, there is no point of power in the past, and there's no point of power in the future. There is only a point of power in taking an action in this moment, in this now. Would you agree with me? So everything that we get as a balance sheet or a past or a net profit is our past and its ROI. It is because of the actions we took last week, last month, and I'm going to say last quarter. And every quarter determines the actions that we're going to see coming at us if we jump back and forth between these 2 things. But if I want to have a tactical objective of efficiency, I'm going to have a very different action. And I don't care if your projects, you batch work. So don't tell me products are different than projects, because I do both and it's not, right? So we batch work, we extend the forecast, we run only on optimal resources, and we outsource for cost reductions, yes? But if I'm looking at a flow-centric action, I'm going to do this. I'm going to find my critical resources, whether they're people or they are capacity or they are shelf space or they are warehouse space, whatever it is. I'm going to run smaller batches to pull, and I'm going to run on any process that's capable because it gives me more flow, even if it's less efficient locally. I know that's sacrilege. Margin maximization. Focus on lowering your unit cost. I'm going to focus on increasing my service level. I'm going to look for premium pricing. I'm going to leverage those constrained resources. I'm going to make certain nothing wastes their time and that they're working on the highest prioritization, whether it's prioritized share of capacity or prioritized share of distribution. And I'm going to leverage them. And I'm going to look for incremental opportunities where I can take my capacity base and make more flow. Then I make more money. Inventory turns, I don't care what, if you're in projects, it's still a WIP. I've got some kind of WIP turn going on. So how many projects you have and the rate that they turn, we can talk about that also. But I'm looking at this versus that. I commit to a stock strategy or an investment strategy that fits what I said I would do with my market. Budget performance. Speed up flow. Volume maximization. Now, each one of these are almost opposite actions, yes? Okay? And I'm going to guarantee you that you have KPIs, each of you do, to try and do both, yes? Yeah. So you're crazy. And there's a reason for it. Now you can feel good and you don't have to take drugs. So,
It's not your fault.
It's not your fault.
Not your fault.
Okay. But it's also not the fault of the people in the room with you. So what it is you have a broken system. So what you really need to do is turn yourself from pointing at each other and point at the system. You've got to fix the system. So we asked the same group of people, what wins out in your organization? And look at this. We have only about 18%, and I think they lied, but it's okay. But I have over 80% of the people saying we either live totally on the cost side, which actually I think is better than the 43% that's saying we're jumping back and forth between both. Because the minute I jump back and forth doing both, I end up with a really interesting thing. I end up with oscillating back and forth between actions that drive variation into my whole world. That's management-induced variation, and Deming had a lot to say about that. So I want you to see this. Just start tracking when we did things with our computer systems. And look what happened to our topple rate. Now, what this tells me, not our topple rate, look what happened to ROI. And what this says is we are doing the wrong things faster because we have data that's instantaneous. And we have the wrong rules, and we're looking at the wrong things. So what have we missed? I had a lovely time. I got to lay down in 2011 for 8 weeks because I broke my back. I have 2 8-inch screws that screwed me together, and I was zero gravity. So that's when I started thinking about this book. And I started thinking about, why can't we explain to people this equation for Plausel? And the truth is, we have been focused totally over here. We knew this, and what the whole world's missed is they've never been focused there. So how can we explain that? So I want you to see that visibility is defined as relevant information for decision making, and variation or variability is defined as the difference between the sum of the differences between what we planned to have happen and what did happen. Does that make sense? So when visibility to relevant information goes up, variation goes down. When variation goes down, everybody, Deming, Ono, Goldratt, what happens to flow? Goes up. Now, when I take visibility to relevant information away, what happens to flow? Goes down because variation goes up. I start doing a lot of wrong actions, and I have to start correcting them. Does that make sense to everybody? It should, and if this is the simplest I can get it. Okay. I can't write anymore. So, when we have to do is define what's relevant information. And then we have to quantify its impact on flow and ROI. And that's actually very easy to do. But you have to have the right definition. So my very first co-author was a guy named Eric Noreen. He is now the most published person in management accounting. And this is a definition right out of his latest book. And I want you to see that relevant information is the information that differs between two alternatives in cost and benefits. Cost means cash flow, not this is management accounting, this is economic term, it's a cash flow, okay? If you can distinguish between relevant and irrelevant information, it's important because there is, of the 99% of the data you have out there, 1% is relevant. So that means I only have a lot less to look at. Okay? That takes a lot less time. I just have to know what it is. But the real danger is that I will use irrelevant information and then I'll make a suboptimal decision. Now, that is bad, and that's where most companies get. Now, when we can take somebody from 3% to 21% or 27% or double their cash flow, they don't buy anything. It's the same people. They're making the same product. They're running the same plants. What are they doing differently? They're looking at relevant information. So we need to talk about relevant range and unit cost. What makes a fixed cost fixed and a variable cost variable? This is economics 101, right? So the relevant range is how long it takes me to step out of a cost from being fixed. All costs in the long run are variable, and all costs in the short run, other than materials and maybe expedite costs or commissions, are fixed. So long run, short run. Now that doesn't fit our unit cost definition, does it? So every time we unitize a fixed cost, we give the false impression that it actually goes up or down with production or flow, and it doesn't. So we have a relevant range of tactics and metrics, and what I want you to see right here, right there, is that in the quarter or the year, I can actually take some actions that could get rid of fixed costs. In fact, you guys are having that experience right now. Okay? But there is nothing I can do in that short-run time frame that's going to change my cost structure if it's not a truly variable cost. That means it has a one-for-one relationship with the product. Okay? But every point of power is in this now. So in this now, is there anything I can do about my fixed cost structure? No, there is absolutely nothing I do. And when I take actions to try and do something about it, I actually harm flow. Okay? So look at that. We basically, what we do is we take all of our metrics and we make certain they are visible, real-time, and they are tied to relevant control points throughout the organization across an entire supply chain, and we make them visible to everybody on what is the schedule and priority of what anybody should be doing with information or materials today. Does that make sense? We'll give you a picture of it later. So, blame it on Newton.
Our friend Newton.
Although Newton knew there were small particles, he just was afraid that the church would murder him and kill him if he explained and talked about them.
Well, yeah, especially with Copernicus and Galileo, when
Yeah,
they
he had
discovered
a lot
that the
of.
Earth wasn't
He
the
had a
center of
lot
the
of.
universe.
And he was smart. He looked at that
all
and
of
said, "I
religion.
think I'll be quiet." Yes.
Yeah, you know. Yeah, it's always that second person after the first one's been shot. Is the real
Obviously,
brave
we're
one.
not smart because we're still not quiet.
Okay, so let's blame it on Newton's clockwork, right? That was our first giant. He's the one that created the Industrial Revolution. So let's look at this perfect world. Just think about it. All of our formal planning systems and all of our improvement methodologies all work perfectly if we live in a perfect world. How many of you live in a perfect world? Right? No. We know, right? Like last night, I got to tell you, landed at PDX. I came in from Dublin yesterday. Landed at PDX. I thought, yes, half hour early. Wahoo, right? Yeah. Lightning off the field. They wouldn't let the ground crew come out. Sat in a plane. So what did I rent? Because I knew I was going to be tired because I'd been up for 23 hours by the time I landed at Portland. And I just wanted to pick up a car at the rental car place and go, right? So I rented an on-airport rental car. As the thrifty driver explained to me, he says, well, we pick you up on airport, and then we take you in the shuttle over to where the cars are. Life is not a perfect world, right? So, as we look at the definition, what is order? Well, we believe that things happen because something causes them. There's a cause and effect. If I do this, then this happens. Okay? Like, never torque off a speaker the day before a presentation. Right? So now all of you know, do not rent from Thrifty at Portland Airport, right? Cause and effect. All right, what about reductionism? Well, the thing is, and this is something that especially academia gets into, is that if we can break things up, all right, we can break things down into the smaller pieces, then we can study and understand them. And if we have small changes, this will give us small effects. And if we make big changes, then those lead to big effects. You've heard of the, let's just sort of, we'll just do the little thing. Now, what about predictability? Well, under Newton, the universe is orderly. It's a perfect world. We've got cause and effect. There's got order, right? And what happens? As I put inputs, I get outputs. This is the basis of linear optimization. So if I have all these different states, then I can run a linear optimization protocol, and I know what the range is of a solution. All right, and then we also have determinism. Right? What determinism is? Well, is that there's no chance, there's no choice, and there's no uncertainty. That everything is predictive. Love Newton. Wouldn't you want to live in his world? All right, so now what are the effect? What's that effect of that foundation? We've all been educated in Newtonian rules. We've all had built on Newtonian rules. Here's the three core beliefs as this comes to 2016 to management. Well, the first thing is, and this goes back to the Roman Empire, where we had an army and it was broken into cohorts, and cohorts are broken into platoons, and you break it down, and for communication purposes, this is the best way to go. So what do? We make departments, right? And then we have departments of departments of departments of departments until finally, maybe somewhere somebody gets something done, with all the infrastructure and overhead to run those departments. The other thing is that we assume, and how many of us have been here as part of process improvement projects, that the best results are obtained when work is streamlined at each department. As I improve each department, the whole will then improve. So anywhere I improve, then the whole benefits. And that we also assume that all of our cost structures are linear, that they're additive and divisible. So that means that if I add up all my average best times, that's going to equal the average system's best time, and therefore my least unit cost. Sound familiar? Okay. So now let's take that to our current systems. And again, I don't mean computer systems. I mean the world in which we are living in. It isn't linear. It's not predictive. Today's supply chains are complex. They are not, drives me nuts when I see a supply chain that says, oh, they just go from customer's customer to supplier's supplier, and you can just break them all down into tiny little pieces, and you can study each piece, and you can put them all back together again. And I go, what world are you living in? Go live with Newton, because they're not that way. What are they? They're web-like structures. In each one of those little orange globes, there's a company that's doing something, building something. And what's inside there? An ERP system. And what's inside that ERP system? MRP. That was what? Developed in the 50s, codified in the 60s, commercialized in the 70s, and hasn't changed. So, we're embedded in this network structure with rules that came from Newton that says that we're linear. Well, the problem is every time I increase variability, what happens? It gets worse, right? And yesterday's plane ride was perfect. We left Dublin an hour and a half late. We landed in, where did I go? Atlanta. Sometimes you sort of look up at the board and you go, I know I'm going to one of those cities. I'm not really quite sure which one's next. And I was in Atlanta going, I know it's the Northwest. I know I'm going to the North. Oh, Portland, okay. So we landed. I was worried. All right, I was really worried, especially when the little screen on the airplane stuck and it said we still had 3 hours and 6 minutes to go. And I thought, either we're circling around Maine or that thing's broken, because it stayed there for 4 hours. That was 3 hours and 6 minutes to go. But I was late coming into Atlanta, but I was 30 minutes early coming into Portland. So as we get variability on each node, what happens? Well, it increases, doesn't it? And the wrong rules inside each node increase variability. And the greater amount of connections that we have amplifies variability. I mean, like, nobody in their right mind is going to take a connection on a flight if they can go there direct. Because what do we know? The more connections we have, the more you have the opportunity. Lady over there nodding. Yep, absolutely. All right? So the greater amount of connections amplifies variability. We live with this every day. So let's look at this. We call this the bullwhip effect. Now, MIT's done a lot of work in this area, but in fact, MIT was not the first ones to write about it. It was written by Forrester out of England in about 1963. Not coincidental that Forrester was writing about it in 63 and MRP was invented in 57. Okay, they knew about it. They already knew about this information pass-off in a tightly coupled system becomes more variable. That's why a guy named Dick Ling invented something called a firm planned order. He invented the master production schedule, and finally he invented sales and operations planning. They knew about it, but they were so in love with that new power they had in the 50s of being able to calculate gross to net, they figured they'd work it out later because their assumption was, as we live in a perfect world. We're with Newton.
But Carol, I just want to point out that it's not just product structure. This could be a project node. This could be a Gantt chart. This could be anything. Anything that has connected dependencies. So,
this is a system.
So we'll stay out of the MRP world.
I know, but I slipped there. That's where my comfort zone is. Remember she said she didn't want to do the MRP thing? That's my world.
Yeah.
Okay, that is my world. So this is a system. It's anything where I have a closely coupled system, what happens? The more things I couple together, I get variation amplification. All right, and what happens? We know lead time goes up, and we know that output goes down. So now let's get into our next two friends, complexity and chaos. This is a great quote. Complexity represents the middle area between order at one end, the Newton world, right, and chaos at the other. So complexity is sometimes called the edge of chaos. If we think of order as ice and chaos as water vapor, complexity would be liquid water. We're back to the ancient Italians, right? We're back to the ships, back to the water again. So the whole science around complex adaptive systems has to do with structure and order, all right? But it's in living systems. See, this is why I think I took to it real well. My undergrad degree is in biology, all right? So I sort of get into the biological things. So if you look at things like the development of an embryo, the development of ecosystems, star systems, social organizations, businesses, nonprofit organizations, technological, environmental considerations, these are all complex adaptive systems. Every one of you and every one of the worlds that you're in, whether it be your business or personal life, you're involved with a complex adaptive system. We're living at the edge of chaos. And when you live at the edge of chaos, you've got two choices. Emerge or die. That's it. And it was the theory of wasn't evolution. Right? It was, how do I innovate? How do I change and adapt? It was the theory of adaptation. So what are complex adaptive systems? Well, they're dynamic. Means that they move from state to state to state to state quickly. So that means that any plans that we have, any priorities that we have, are only valid for a very short time. As we look at interconnectedness, what happens? It means that every time I put a push, out it comes. So we have to understand how that, where I put the push and out it comes, there's only one way to understand that. We have to understand it by understanding the interdependencies and interconnectedness. Interesting. Now take that to Newton, who said, oh no, we're going to understand everything by chopping it up into little pieces. As soon as we start chopping it up into the little pieces, we've now lost the most valuable information that we have, and the really only relevant information that we have. So as we look at the more complex, all right, is the greater the distance between cause and effect. Well, sometimes things happen, and sometimes it's referred to as the butterfly effect. Butterfly flaps its wings in India, and there's a hurricane in the Caribbean. All right? But really, its cause and effect are not proportional. A little thing can happen over here that sets off a huge revolution over here. All right? We look at the impact of social media. Small thing that we thought it was going to be just a bunch of kids in college sort of networking with each other. Look what's happened. How do we connect up? So complex systems, by definition, cannot be optimized. So all these companies, I get to spend a lot of time with executives, talking to them how they could spend millions of dollars, billions of dollars, on advanced planning and optimization systems, and why is it that their customer service has gone down and their inventory's gone up? And it's this answer. By definition, they're trying to optimize a complex system, which can't be optimized. However, what you can do is it can learn, adapt, and emerge. And that's what Accelerate's all about, is how do we learn, adapt, and emerge, not only as a company, but also as individuals. So what are complex adaptive systems? Well, complex adaptive systems is conventional thinking, right? Rules and tools are all based on what? Newton. Okay? Newton created calculus, been around for a long time. Complex adaptive systems also have rules. Have you ever tried to play a game with a 2-year-old, 4-year-old? They keep changing the rules, right? How can you play a game when you don't know the rules? Well, that's why we've got to understand what the rules are for complex adaptive systems. And the rules in the math are positively 100%, 180-degree difference. Now, here's the sad part. Most business leaders, many scientists, many academics, operational personnel, they don't understand the difference, and they don't understand the implications. So they're very different. First is we look at how do we understand the system. In a linear system, we try to understand each piece. Non-linear, dependencies. System predictability. Well, we think that with the input comes output on a linear system. That's Newtonian. Complex adaptive systems. Yeah, no. You push on it, it changes, it morphs. As soon as you run an optimizer on it, yep, it just changed again. Take a look at the companies in Japan. After the tsunami hit, all the companies that bought from that area of Japan optimized someplace else. Never went back. Okay. Devastating effect. System output. We look at the output of a linear system is proportional to the input. I used to work for a boss that said, his theory of work and process was, keep loading it out to the shop floor, sooner or later they'll ship something. Gotta love it, right? Well, what do we know? We know that a system output for complex adaptive system, it's operated by a few levers. Okay, it's the lever point. We knew this back to Archimedes, because what did Archimedes say? If you can find a leverage point and a lever long enough, I can move the world. So again, not new. Now, as we also look at the mathematical model of the system, linear, our friend Gaussian, right? The normal population curve, bell curve. And what did they teach us when they taught us the bell curve? What's on the tails? Outliers. Ignore them. Really? Anybody that knows Six Sigma in the room? Where do you focus first? Where's the only relevant information? On the tails. Okay, focus on the tails. And system output optimization, a linear system by definition can be optimized. A complex adaptive system, by definition, cannot. So we're still trying to run companies and our departments and our ecosystems using a set of rules that was based on Newton. It's Newton's fault. And the real rules, the real laws out there, the 4-year-old that we're playing with is playing with complex adaptive system rules. So the coherence of the subsystem determines the overall success of the system. So here it is, guys. You're the leaders. The quicker that we can learn, the quicker that we can self-regulate, the quicker that we can adapt, and the quicker we can change, in other words, the more we can accelerate, the more sustainable success that we're going to get. Okay? Organizations that are successful do what? We live at the edge of chaos. Okay? We live right at that edge. Why don't we cross over that edge to chaos? Because it's like falling off the cliff. Okay? It's a first step, long way down. All right? But now, you can't win if you don't know the rules. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to focus on what are the rules. So we're going to live at the edge of chaos. And how do we live there? We've got to live with the right rules. The right rules are the SMART metrics. It's how do I design a system with visibility. As Deb said, if I improve visibility, I reduce variability. As I reduce variability, I improve flow. As I improve flow, flow is tied directly to return on investment. So the key is to design a system with visible, real-time, relevant, not big data, relevant information. There's a big difference between data and information. All right, information is context. All right, data is just a bunch of numbers. Right? So relevant information at critical points, those are those leverage points that allow the organization to live safely, all right, on the edge of chaos. And that's what SMART metrics are all about.
Yeah, I think we're taking a break, aren't we?
I think we're at break, right?
I don't know. Didn't it say break? I think we're at a break.
I think we're at break.
Yeah. I think we're going to break. And,
I think so
and
too.
leverage points are not constraints.
Yes.
They're not just constraints. Constraints are one case of leverage points. And we'll talk about that when we get